From marching on the battlefields of 18th century Europe to more modern warfare such as the jungles of Malaya or the deserts of Afghanistan, the British soldier has long been at the sharp end of conflict. Whether dressed in rudimentary uniform or in today's modern battle armour, the essential premise has always remained the same. That is to engage with the enemy, close with the enemy, and defeat that enemy.
In this series, we'll be taking a journey through over 350 years of primary firearms used by British infantry, from the slow-loading muskets of the English Civil War to the early rifles that helped forge and maintain the British Empire, up to the modern weapons used on the battlefields of the Falklands, the Middle East and Helmand. Joining us will be weapons historian and retired Army officer Adam Symes, who'll be explaining how each of the weapons featured in this series functioned, evolved and impacted on the battlefield.
So Adam, where are we?
So Simon, today we're at the Small Arms School Corps Museum and Weapons Collection here in Warminster in the United Kingdom. It houses a comprehensive collection of firearms from the 16th century to the present day.
Right, so I'm not the expert here, but I can tell that I'm in the presence of something very, very old, very, very precious and very important for the British Army. Can you tell me what we have here?
Absolutely, Simon. So what we've got here is two examples of some really early firearms used by the British Army. At the back here, we've got a Matchlock Musket, and at the front here, we've got a Doglock. And I'll break those down for you in a bit. But yeah, these two weapons represent a really important part in weapons development. And actually, these two date back almost 350 years. Very, very old pieces.
So they look very, very heavy. Obviously quite a rudimentary design, early design for shooting like a projectile. What kind of projectile would these be firing out?
So we'll talk about the Matchlock first. So this piece would fire a 0.75 inch round lead ball. The lead ball would be just a simple cast ball done with a simple die, and often those balls did not fit the bore, so the size of the barrel, so they would not fit down there. So if we take anecdotes from the English Civil War, a lot of soldiers had to chew the lead down to fit down the barrel, hence many suffering lead poisoning as a result.
So it's quite likely that you could have died from lead poisoning rather than being shot with one of these.
Absolutely, and you bring up a really good point here. I mean, these firearms absolutely revolutionised the battlefield. However, they were not the most accurate weapons in the world. You're talking a smoothbore barrel, so inside there's no rifling. So rifling is what spins a projectile. It's completely smooth. So you're really looking at best 100 yards, 90 metres thereabouts, of actually effective sort of a deadly zone. However, actually hitting a target, very unlikely, because you'll note from this, there are no sights. There are no sights. And the use of these things absolutely required some form of defensive position. So let's take 1640s England, used on the battlefield by either the Royalist forces or the parliamentary forces. Musketeers would require pikemen to defend them. These were very slow to load. A musketeer would likely go into battle with only the ability to fire 12 rounds. You might notice on historic pictures, the bandolier carried by a musketeer was wooden pots. Essentially, these wooden pots, called apostles, so 12 apostles, would have a measured charge of powder. They'd have a pouch for their ball, their ammunition, and literally they'd open the wooden pot, pour the barrel down, put some wadding, a piece of cotton, piece of the silk, unlikely the silk, and then they put the ball in, ram it home with the ramrod, which you'll be able to see just here. And actually on these muskets, it's called a scouring stick. Ram it home, bring it up to bear, and they would use it because of the actual weight, one of these, shooting support. So they'd rest that there, musket on, and then fire.
So how long would it take on average then to load this from, say, just a stock still position to getting ready to fire it at an enemy?
A very good musketeer would be hard pushed to do 2. 1 round a minute would be pretty much the maximum. Given this would be used in a time of cavalry and pikemen, musketeers were incredibly vulnerable. hence why the need to develop a better system, a faster system.
So Adam, can you tell me a little bit more about the mechanism on the gun?
So as I say, we'll go through the mechanism of this musket, and as the name alludes, it's a matchlock musket. Now, the lock is this mechanism here, okay? So what happens is the soldier would have what's known as match, and this is essentially sort of a fine rope which is would mix with a saltpeter mixture that gives it a slow burn. And this match has to be constantly lit. Okay, so this thing is constantly burning. So you can see now this is already quite a dangerous mechanism when you're working with gunpowder. As I alluded to before, the apostle, the charge in the wooden flask was emptied a small piece into here, just enough in that pan, closed up. Okay, by which point this match was held in the other hand.
Right.
Because you didn't want it there. Okay, the rest of the charge was put down the barrel. Okay, this was obviously double check that this was down. Your match would be reinserted into the lock. This thing here is called the serpentine. Okay, and when you are ready to fire, so you get your shooting post, shooting stick up, you support. You take rudimentary aim, because we've already said there's no sights here at all. The pan is opened and the trigger is brought down. And bearing in mind, this weapon dates back from 1681. I'm not going to pull it back because this is incredibly old. Okay, what happens is that goes into the pan, lights that powder in the pan, and if you notice there's a very small hole. That flash will then ignite the powder inside the barrel, pushing the projectile out.
Wow, that's staggering.
I mean, there's a lot of working parts for that, and also a lot of times where this can go very badly wrong.
I'm sure.
We've already talked about the sort of the inaccuracy of the weapon and the slowness to load. One of the major sort of flaws with this design, other than the fact that it's actually quite a simple structure, is the fact that you're using a burning match. Now, try using that in rain or inclement weather, very hard. Also, the fact that if you were a sentry on duty, so you're guarding a fort, you'd have to have this on all night. So if you were on guard duty all night, that match would have to burn all night. And the rough estimate is a sentry in a year's worth of guard duty would burn through a mile of this a year.
Wow.
One man.
Wow.
The other thing, of course, is the fact that we are dealing with a burning match next to powder, and there were several instances, and this is cited in the English Civil War, of soldiers going in to reload, and there wasn't nicely compacted sort of bullets to pick up. You had to go pick up your powder, refill your flasks. Now, a lot of soldiers going into one barrel of gunpowder to refill their flasks, one stray spark from this, and you can imagine the results. Very, very dangerous, and a lot of friendly fire, shall we say, as a result of having the burning match.
So Adam, can you tell me a little bit more about the manufacturing process of these guns, how they were made, how quickly they could be made, and what campaigns they might have been used in?
Really good question. So this is pre-industrial revolution, so we're talking 17th century England, and this is actually an English matchlock. At that time, gunsmithing in the UK was not comparable to Europe, so it wouldn't be like sort of the gunsmiths in Germany, Italy at the time, and even Spain to a certain degree. But they were made of a pretty good quality, and this piece here is arguably the simplified perfection of the matchlock. But as you can tell from our previous discussions, there was very little standardisation. Most of these were made in small batches in local gunsmithing sort of outlets. They weren't done on a mass scale, which is something we'll come and see later on in next iterations. As to campaigns, absolutely widespread. This was used thoroughly throughout the 17th century, from the English settlers arriving in Jamestown in the early part of the century, through the Civil War, where we start our story with the British Army, or the development of the British Army, and right the way through campaigns to the latter part of that century. It really was the workhorse, and really what brought firearms technology to the masses, essentially. This piece of equipment cannot be underestimated, how important it is in developing warfare.
So obviously a very important gun for the British Army, but of course there's more than just one gun on the table. We've got this other one in front of us here. So can you tell me how this basically gave rise to this?
So here we have what's known as the Doglock Musket, and the name Doglock will become a little bit more apparent in a second. So essentially what we've got here is a change of means of ignition. Okay, so we've moved from using a burning match to using a flint and striker. Okay, so essentially this technology, the flintlock, had been around for quite a long time, over 100 years in fact, but the perfection of that lock and that mechanism hadn't really become achievable to the everyday soldier. You may have cavalrymen at the time with short flintlock pistols. There was also the wheel lock system, a very complicated system which we won't get into today. However, by the 1680s, 1690s, there was a move away from this means of ignition to using a flint ignition. What did this mean? Well, this meant that, one, you could fire a lot quicker. You didn't have the cumbersome match to get in the way. It was safer, more reliable, and also meant we start to see a degree of standardisation. Not quite the same as we would do in sort of the next century, but actually we're starting to see a lot finer workmanship. So you'll see now there'll be maker marks in the barrel. You'll start to see a little bit more ornate work here. And actually you've got finer workings inside, which unfortunately, due to the age of this piece, we can't take apart. But a very detailed, very well made and well thought out piece of equipment. What makes this different from what we call a true flintlock is the fact it's a doglock. Now again, due to the age of the mechanism, I won't pull it back, but this does not have what we call a half cock. Okay, so when you pull this back, you have to pull it back and use this catch here, called the dog leg, hence the dogleg musket, to hold it all the way back. That inability to have it half cock will delay its ability to be reloaded, and also its safety. Okay, so not a true flintlock, but essentially the bridging step between this and what we'll see later on as a true flintlock.
And would this have been manufactured by the same people who manufactured this gun?
No, by this latter part of the 17th century and going into the 18th century, we're now starting to see the early days of more mass production. So more industrialization, not to the stage of the full industrial revolution, but these are getting produced to a more standardized pattern. I say more to, not quite, but we're still far away from having a true standard pattern for the British Army.
And who might have been the unlucky fella staring down the wrong end of this barrel in which campaigns?
So the most famous use of this has to be the Duke of Marlborough and his in the Battle of Blenheim. The British, the red coat by this point would have been armed with this, going onto the battlefields at Blenheim. So probably the most famous use of this firearm. But again, it was largely short-lived in the sense that, you know, we're going from this into the 1640s into the 1680s. 1680s, it turned into the 1700s, and then they're going to refine this system, and then which will take us on to the next stage.
And I notice as well, of course, that we have this rather deadly-looking implement at the end of the table here as well. How that would have sort of paired with this?
Really good question, Simon. So this here is what's known as a plug bayonet. Now, you'll know from this, we talked about the use of a pike to defend themselves. By the latter part of the 17th century, the use of the pike had almost gone away because the use of the bayonet had come into effect. Now, this is a plug bayonet, known as a plug bayonet because it's literally plugged down the end of the barrel. There's no means to attach it to the side. There's no socket as yet. But essentially what this gave the soldier was the ability to have a pike in itself, a spear. So he could fire his weapon system however many times, and by this point we're looking at 2, maybe 3 rounds a minute, so increase on the matchlock. But once he's finished firing, he can then put this down the end of his barrel and then use it, as you'll see, sort of more of a traditional bayonet charge. Now, clearly this has some limitations because once it's down the barrel, it takes a lot to get it out of the barrel. So you cannot use the action again. And we'll see this develop quite quickly. And this was becoming commonplace all over Europe by the end of the 17th century and into the 18th century. Generally, it's considered it sort of originated in France, but hard to find a definite point when it was really initially first used. But it spread very quickly, and so much so that by the start of the 18th century, the pike had disappeared from the battlefield.